Warm welcome and very good morning. Myself, Dr.M.Rajalakshmi, Assistant Professor, Bharat Institute of Law, Bharat Institute of Higher Education and Research. Today, in this presentation, we are going to deal with this topic, active and passive voice. A very important grammatical aspect, active and passive voice. In this presentation, we are going to see what do you mean by voice or the definition for voice and the two classification of voice and how to identify an active sentence, active voice sentence and a passive voice sentence. Apart from this, what are the various uses of these two types of voices, that is active voice and passive voice. And we'll also see the basic rules that are pertaining when we change it from one type to another, that is from active to passive or vice versa. These are all the things that we are going to discuss in this presentation. First, we will see what do you mean by voice. Voice is the form of a verb takes to indicate whether the subject of the verb performs or receives the action. That needs to be underlined. That is, whether the subject is performing or the subject is receiving something. That is very, very important. So based on the subject, whether it is performing or receiving, we can tell the sentence belongs to one form or the other form. So this is the basic explanation for voice. And as I have already explained, the two types of voice, they are active voice and passive voice. So now we'll see what do you mean by active voice. What is the actual explanation given for active voice? So active voice indicates that the subject of the verb is acting. So the subject of the verb actually acts upon. So because the subject does or acts upon the verb, in such sentences, those sentences, they are said to be in the active voice form. So now let us see some examples for these active voice. So the first sentence which I have given, the dog jumped onto the boy. The dog jumped onto the boy. So we should first know what is the subject here. So the dog is the subject. So it is doing some action. So what is it doing? It is jumping. It is jumping onto the boy. Okay, so we mind that we take the subject, that is the dog, and what is the action done by the dog, that is jumping. The dog is the subject and the action is done by the subject. Since the subject is doing the action, we call this sentence to be active voice sentence. In the similar way, I have also given two other examples. Let us see those two examples. Christy will give a book report to the class. This is the second example. So in this example, Christy is the subject. So she is doing some action. She is going to give a book report to the class. So she is going to do this. Okay, so here the subject, since it is doing this action of giving something, giving the book report, we call this sentence to be in the active form, active voice form. The third example, the computer ate my paper. This is the third example. So computer, as usual, is the subject. The computer is the subject. What is the action it is doing? It is using lot of paper. That is, it is eating the paper. So the computer ate my paper. So computer is a subject which is doing the action. So all these sentences, since the subject is doing the action, we call them to be active voice sentences. Right. Since we have seen what is meant by voice, what are the two types of voice, that is active and passive. What do we mean by active voice? The explanation for active voice with certain examples. Now let us move on to the other voice, that is passive voice. So we will see what do we mean by passive voice, and we'll also see certain examples for these passive voice sentences. In a passive voice sentence, the subject and the object flip-flop. That is, for easy understanding, we can use it as a shortcut also. So the subject and the object generally flip-flop. They interchange the place. The subject takes the place of the object and the object becomes the subject. So that is the first clue to identify passive voice sentence. And the subject becomes the passive recipient of the action. So subject will not do the action. It becomes the recipient of the action. That is a basic difference between active voice sentence and the passive voice sentence. To be more clear, you can say, because the subject is being acted upon or is in the passive, such sentences are said to be in the passive voice form. So this is very, very important. The subject is being acted upon. So whenever this happens in a sentence, we call those sentences to be in the passive voice form. Now let us see certain examples. These examples show the subject being acted upon by the verb. So for easy understanding, I have used the same examples that I have given for active voice. The boy was jumped on by the dog. Here, it is not the dog, but the boy has become the subject. So, which was being jumped on. So here, the subject being acted upon. So the subject and the object flip-flop, as we have already said, and the subject was being acted upon, like in the sentence, was being jumped on. Similarly, a book report will be given by Christy to the class. Here again, the book report or the report, which has become, that is in the active form, which is the object, that has become now the subject. So, which will be given tomorrow or in the forthcoming days. So, this is how we need to change it from active to passive. The first rule, the subject and the object, they flip-flop, they interchange the position. And finally, the last sentence, my paper was eaten by the computer. Here again, paper becomes the subject in the passive voice, and which is being eaten, which is being acted upon. So as I have said in the beginning itself, so we'll also see what are the reasons why do we use active voice in certain places and why do we use passive voice in certain other places? We should also know this. So grammar is not of completely rules and regulations. It is actually how do we implement it while we write and speak. So we should also know the rules, and also why do we use certain things. We should also be very clear about that. So we'll see the reasons why we should use active voice sentences, and then we'll see when do we use passive voice sentences, what are the reasons to use such sentences. So most of the writers or speakers, they prefer to use active voice sentence. The main reason, prominent reason, is that it is more direct. Since it is more direct, many of us, while speaking or writing, prefer to use active voice. So this could be easily understood, this statement could be easily understood with the example which I have given. So the first sentence is in the active voice form. The waiter dropped the tray of food. The waiter, subject, dropped, verb, the tray of food, which is in the active form. So when we change it to the passive voice form, obviously the object becomes the subject. The tray of food was dropped by the waiter. So we can easily understand the complexity in the passive voice form. The active is more direct and it could be easily understood. But when it comes to passive form, of course, it has certain complexity. And other reasons why do we use active voice? The second important reason why do we use active voice is it is less awkward, which is not confusing or perplexing, and it clearly states the relationship between subject and the action. So when we read an active voice sentence, we can easily identify the subject and what is the action done by the subject. It's very clear. And there is no sort of confusion over there when we read the active voice sentence. So I've given one example. First in the passive voice form, then I have changed it to the active voice form so that we can understand why I am saying so. It is less awkward or less confusing, and it's very clear also. So let us read the sentence. Your request for funding has been denied by the review committee. This sentence is in the passive voice form. Though we can understand the meaning, it takes certain time and we need to read it very carefully to understand the meaning. But when it comes to the active voice form, the first reading itself, we can easily, as I have said, identify the subject and also the action. And more to that, what is the actual meaning of the sentence could be very easily understood. It's very clear. So let us see the active voice sentence. The review committee denied your request for funding. It's as simple as it is. So here we can easily find out who is denying. So the review committee, that is the subject. So it is doing certain action. What is it doing? It is denying the request for funding. It's as simple, very clear. Because the first reading itself, we can easily understand the meaning. So this is the reason why do we generally prefer active voice sentence. It's very clear. It's not confusing, less awkward. And also, as I have said previously, that it is direct. We can easily identify the subject and what is the action done by the subject is also very easily identified, and it's very clear also to understand. So the active voice sentence pattern propels the reader forward through your writing, thus avoiding weak prose. So this is the greatest advantage of active voice sentence. It makes the readers to move very easily forward and complete whatever they are trying to read. So that there lies the success of the writer. So generally, writers prefers active voice form. Now, so we have seen lots of advantages why generally we use active voice. As we have said, it is not awkward, it is not confusing, it is clear, it is direct, and also we can easily identify the subject and what is the action done by the subject. Then we can question what is the need for having such passive voice sentences. Why should we have it? We have already said it is confusing, it takes time to understand, it is not that easy to understand. Then why should we have passive voice sentences? There must be some reason, there must be some usage for this passive voice sentences. Then only we'll have such types of sentences, then only we'll be using such type of sentences. So now we'll see what are the situations or what are the reasons we use such passive voice sentences. So let us see that. In general, the passive voice is less direct, less forceful, and less concise than the active voice. This we have already seen. It is lengthier, it is not concise, it is not forceful also, it is not direct also, because we first talk about the object and then we'll tell the action acted upon. Though it is having a lot of these kind of disadvantages, in some situations it is must, or people tend to use passive voice sentences. What are those situations? That is what we are going to see now. So use the passive voice in the following situations. When do we use it? Passive voice when you do not know, when we do not know the performer of an action. So in all cases, we might not know who is doing the action. In such cases, this passive voice sentences are helpful. In such cases, we can only use passive voice sentences, where when we do not know who is actually performing the action, who is doing the action, who is the subject or what is the subject. In such cases, we use passive voice sentences. Or in other case, in case one, we do not know who is performing. On the other hand, sometimes we do not want to reveal who is the performer or who is doing the action. We don't want to reveal the subject, what is doing what, who is doing what. In such cases, we use passive voice. Number one, we do not know who is doing the action. Number two, we don't want to reveal who is doing the action. In those cases, we generally use passive voice sentences. Then, passive voice sentences when you want to emphasize the receiver of an action. It is not that we don't know the performer or we do not want to reveal the performer. It is also when we want to emphasize the receiver of an action, that is the object. If at all you want to emphasize the object, if at all you want to give some importance to the object, in such cases, we generally use passive voice form. So these are the various reasons why do we use passive voice. We have also seen why do we use active voice sentences. So now moving on to the examples. So as we have said, we do not know, if you don't know the subject, if you don't know who is performing the action, we use passive voice. So we'll see certain examples. Though it has been mentioned as active, awkward, passive, there are certain cases we need to use them. My bicycle was repainted by John. Right? So here we can take the emphasis you wanted to give on the object, bicycle. It is not John you wanted to emphasize. In such case, we use passive, though it is awkward, we need to use it. In the other way, my bicycle was repainted. Here, you do not know who has done this action, or you do not want to mention who has done the action. So either you don't like to mention or you don't know who has done this action. So in such cases, we generally use this passive voice form. Yes, so we have seen what is meant by voice, the two types of voice, the two types of sentences, active and passive. And we have also seen certain examples, and we have also seen how to convert it from one form to another. And what are the reasons? Why do we use active voice sentences in certain places? Why do we use passive voice sentences in certain other places? That also we have already seen. Now we are going to see certain rules that we need to follow when we change from one form to another. The first rule is that the passive voice requires a double verb and will always consist of a form of the verb to be, that is the be form. So it is always double verb. It should be the form of a be form. So in the next slide, I'll give you what are all the various forms of be forms, right? And another important factor is that the past participle, that is the V3, V1, V2, V3, present, past, past participle. So the V3 form should be always used when we change it from active to passive. So these two rules need to be followed. So for understanding this rule, I have given one example. The example goes like this. John baked the bread. This is in the active form. Then we change it to the passive form. We need to use the be form with the V3 form. So bread is the object, so which becomes the subject in the passive forms. The bread was baked. Since baked is the past form, we are using was baked. The V3 form, baked by John. Was is the form of the verb V3 here in this sentence. This basic rule one must remember while converting from one form to another, that is active to passive. Form of passive voice words. As I've already told you, I'll give you a list of be forms which students can remember while changing from one form to another. So they are often called linking verbs so that they can easily identify the passive voice in their work. So what are they? Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, and been. Once again, I'll repeat. Am, is, are, was, were, be, being, and been. So these are the various forms of be one should remember while changing it from active to passive. So here in this slide, we can note the forms of to be in the examples, and I have used the root verb kick to kick in the various forms of passive voice. So let us see those examples. Is kicked, was kicked, is being kicked, was being kicked, had been kicked, has been kicked, will be kicked, and modal verb should be kicked. Next, form of a passive voice verb. Often passive voice sentences will contain a by phrase. This is the second rule one must remember. By phrase indicating who or what performed the action. So this is a very easy method, or this is a shortcut. Students can easily identify the passive voice sentence. In a sentence, if it has by, you can easily say that sentence to be in the passive voice form. This by phrase indicates who or what is performing the action. First rule regarding the verb, the be form verb and the V3 form verb should be followed. And the next one, by phrase. Passive sentences can be easily transformed into active sentences when the object of the preposition by is moved to the subject position in the sentence. So examples, the cookies were eaten by the children. So we can easily say the sentences in the passive voice since it has the be form and the V3 and also the by phrase. So when we change it to the active form, the object that becomes the subject. The children ate the cookies. The children ate the cookies. Similarly, the second sentence, the tunnels are dug by the gophers. When we change it to the active form, the gophers dug the tunnels. Since we have used are the present form, be form, so the verb is dug. Okay. So now we need to have certain exercises. These sentences students can try. I'll read out these sentences and you have to first find it out. All these sentences are in the passive voice form and you can take it as exercise and you try to convert it to the active voice form. Okay, I'll read out the sentences. The statue is being visited by hundreds of tourists every year. The second sentence, my books were stolen by someone yesterday. The next sentence, these books had been left in the classroom by a careless student. So you have to identify the subject and the be form verb, and you have to flip-flop the subject and the object by removing the phrase by. Coffee is raised in many parts of Hawaii by plantation workers. The last sentence, the house has been broken into by someone while the owners were on vacation. Right? Some more sentences which are in the active form. Students are instructed to change it to the passive form. Right? I'll read out those sentences. Children cannot open these bottles easily. Children cannot open these bottles easily. Next sentence. The government built a road right outside her front door. Third one. Mr. Rose broke the antique vase as he walked through the store. When she arrived, the changes amazed her. So next one. And the fifth sentence. The construction workers are making street repairs all month long. Now, I've given a tabular column which will help students to remember once they try to change it from active to passive or passive to active with a tense. So if it is simple tense, what has to be done? If it is simple continuous, what needs to be done? So if you remember this table, one can very easily convert sentences from one form to another. So first, present tense, simple present. Make is the verb. I make a cake. So when we change it, a cake is made by me. A cake is made by me. In the similar way, since it is concentrating on the tense, the subject has not been mentioned. Okay, in the passive form, the object is missed. First, simple present, moving on to present continuous. I am making a cake. A cake is being. Since it is present, it is present continuous, being should be added. A cake is being made by me. Similarly, past simple. I made a cake. A cake was. In the present, we use the be form is. Since it is past verb made is used. So we use the be form was. A cake was made. Similarly, for past continuous, I was making a cake, which will change to a cake was being. In the present continuous, it is being. When it comes to past continuous, it is was being made. The V3 form. See, in all the active sentences, we use make. When we change it to passive, the V3 form made is used. See, moving on to the perfect sentences. Present perfect. I have made a cake. So which we will change it to a cake has been. Been needs to be added. A cake has been made. Similarly, if it is past perfect, I had made a cake, which will change to a cake had been made. So if it is future simple, I will make a cake. When it is changed to the passive form, a cake will be made. So if it is future, which is going to happen, so I am going to make a cake. A cake is going to be made. A cake is going to be made. So if modal verbs are used, like must, need, should, shall, can. So how the change will happen when you change it to active and passive? I must make a cake. A cake must be made. Similarly, I should have made a cake. A cake should have been made. So please, students, remember this chart. So if you remember this chart, this exercise of active and passive will become very simple. So as we have seen the verb, now we'll move on to the subject case. One must also know how the changes takes place for various subjective cases. So when it becomes the object. So for instance, if it is I, first person singular, we'll change it to by me. Similarly, we becomes by us. If it is you, it becomes second person by you. It could be singular or it could be plural. So there is no change by you. So similarly, when it comes to third person, he, third person singular, by him, becomes by him. So if it is feminine, third person singular, she, becomes by her. If it is it, by it. If it is they, by them, by them. So these are the various factors when it comes to the grammatical aspect, active and passive voice. So in this presentation, we have seen the definition, the explanation for active and passive voice with examples and the various reasons why should we use active voice. What are the uses for passive voice sentences? Though it is complex, though it is not that clear, we tend to use them. What are the reasons that we have seen? And we have also seen certain other examples. And exercises have also been given for the students to work out. And finally, we have seen how the subjective cases changes when we change it to the passive forms, and similarly the tense. What is the change if it is a simple verb or the simple past, simple present, continuous, present perfect. So all these aspects, I hope students would have understood thoroughly. And whenever this kind of exercise comes, I hope students would very easily do the thing. So with this note, I'm ending this presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you.